We are moving too fast, acting as if Oedipus were already installed within the savage territorial machine. However, as Nietzsche says with regard to bad conscience, such a plant does not grow on that kind of terrain. This is explained by the fact that the necessary conditions for Oedipus as a familial complex, existing in the framework of the familialism suited to psychiatry and psychoanalysis, are obviously not present. Primitive families constitute a praxis, a politics, a strategy of alliances and filiations. Formally, they are the driving elements of social reproduction. They have nothing to do with an expressive microcosm. In these families, the father, the mother, and the sister always also function as something other than the father, mother, or sister. And in addition to the father, the mother, etc., there is the affine, who constitutes the active, concrete reality and makes the relations between families coextensive with the social field. It would not even be exact to say that the family determinations burst apart at every corner of this field and remain attached to strictly social determinations, since both kinds of determinations form one and the same component in the territorial machine. Since familial reproduction is not yet a simple means or a material at the service of a social reproduction of another nature, there is no possibility of reducing, rabattre sur, social reproduction to the familial reproduction, nor is it possible to establish one-to-one relations between the two that would confer on any familial complex whatever an expressive value in an apparent autonomous form. On the contrary, it is evident that the individual in the family, however young, directly invests a social, historical, economic, and political field that is not reducible to any mental structure or affective constellation. That is why, when one considers pathological cases and processes of cure in primitive societies, it seems to us entirely insufficient to compare them with psychoanalytic procedure by relating them to the criteria borrowed from the latter. For example, a familial complex, even if it differs from our own, or cultural material, de contentieux culturel, even if it is brought into relation with an ethnic unconscious, as seen in attempted parallelisms between the psychoanalytic cure and the shamanic cure, Devereux, Levi-Strauss. Our definition of schizoanalysis focused on two aspects: the destruction of the expressive pseudo-forms of the unconscious, and the discovery of desire's unconscious investments of the social field. It is from this point of view that we must consider many primitive cures. They are schizoanalysis in action. Victor Turner gives a remarkable example of such a cure among the Ndembu. The example is the more striking to our perverted eyes for the fact that at first glance everything appears Oedipal. Effeminate, insufferable, vain, failing at everything he tries, the sick K is preyed upon by the ghost of his maternal grandfather who cruelly reproaches him. Although the Ndembu or matrilineal must live with their maternal kin, K has stayed an exceptionally long time in the matrilineage of his father, whose favorite he was, and has entered into marriage with paternal cousins. But with the death of his father, he is driven away and returns to the maternal village. There his house expresses the situation well, being wedged between two sectors, the houses of the members of the paternal group and those belonging to his own matrilineage. How does the divination responsible for indicating the cause of the illness proceed, and the medical cure responsible for treating it? The teeth are the cause. The two top incisors of the ancestor hunt are contained in a sacred pouch, but which can escape from the pouch and penetrate the body of the sick man. In order to diagnose and ward off the effects of the incisor, the soothsayer and the medicine man launch into a social analysis concerning the territory and its environs, the chieftainship and its sub-chieftainships, the lineages and their segments, the alliances and the filiations. They constantly bring to light desire in its relations with political and economic units, the very point on which, moreover, the witnesses try to mislead them. Quote, divination becomes a form of social analysis in the course of which hidden struggles between individuals and factions are brought to light in such a way that they can be treated by traditional ritual methods, the vague nature of mystical beliefs allowing them to be manipulated in relation to a great number of social situations. It seems that the pathological incisor is indeed mainly that of the maternal grandfather, but the latter was a great chief. His successor, the real chief, had had to relinquish the throne for fear of being bewitched, and his would-be heir, intelligent and ambitious, does not exercise the power. The actual chief is not the real chief. As for the sick K, he has not been able to assume the role of mediator that could have made him candidate for the chief. Everything becomes complicated because of the colonizer-colonized relations. The English have not recognized the chieftainship. The impoverished village is falling into decrepitude. The two sectors of the village result from the fusion of two groups that have fled the English. The elders bemoan the current decadence. The medicine man does not organize a sociodrama, but a veritable group analysis centering on the sick individual. giving him potions, attaching horns to his body for drawing up the incisor, making the drums beat. The medicine man proceeds with the ceremony, interrupted by halts and fresh departures, flows of all sorts, flows of words and breaks. The members of the village come to talk, the sick subject talks, the ghost is invoked, the medicine man explains, everything recommences, drums, chants, trances. It is not only a question of discovering the preconscious investments of the social field by interests, but more profoundly, its unconscious investments by desires, such as they pass by way of the sick person's marriages, his position in the village, and all the positions of a chief lived in intensity within the group. We said that the point of departure seemed edible. It was only the point of departure for us, conditioned to say Oedipus every time someone speaks to us of father, mother, grandfather. In fact, the Ndembu analysis was never edible. It was directly plugged into social organization and disorganization. Sexuality itself, through the women and the marriages, was just such an investment of desire. The parents played the role of stimuli in it, and not the role of group organizers or disorganizers, the role held by the chief and his personages. Rather than everything being reduced to the name of the father or that of the maternal grandfather, the latter opened onto all the names of history, instead of everything being projected onto a grotesque hiatus of castration. Everything was scattered in the thousand breaks, flows of the chieftainships, the lineages, the relations of colonization, the whole interplay of races, clans, alliances, and affiliations, this entire historical and collective drift, exactly the opposite of Oedipal analysis when it stubbornly crushes the content of a delirium, when it stuffs it with all its might into the symbolic void of the father. Or rather, if it is true that the analysis doesn't even begin as Oedipal, except to our way of seeing, doesn't it become Oedipal nevertheless in a certain way, and in what way? Yes, it becomes Oedipal in part under the effect of colonization. The colonizer, for example, abolishes the chieftainship or uses it to further his own ends, and he uses many other things besides. The chieftainship is only a beginning. The colonizer says, your father is your father and nothing else, or your maternal grandfather. Don't mistake them for chiefs. You can go have yourself triangulated in your corner and place your house between those of your paternal and maternal kin. Your family is your family and nothing else. Sexual reproduction no longer passes through those points, although we rightly need your family to furnish a material that will be subjected to a new order of reproduction. Yes, then an Oedipal framework is outlined for the dispossessed primitives, a shantytown Oedipus. We have seen, however, that the colonized remain a typical example of resistance to Oedipus. In fact, that's where the Oedipal structure does not manage to close itself and where the terms of the structure remain stuck to the agents of oppressive and social reproduction, either in a struggle or in a complicity. The white man, the missionary, the tax collector, the exporter of goods, the person with standing in the village who becomes an agent of the administration, the elders who curse the white man, the young people who enter into a political struggle, etc. Both are true. The colonized resists Oedipalization, and Oedipalization tends to close around him again. To the degree that there is Oedipalization, it is due to colonization, and it is necessary to add Oedipalization to all the methods that Jolien was able to describe in La Paix Blanche. Quote, the condition of the colonized can lead to a reduction in the unitization of the universe so that any solution that is sought will be a solution on the scale of the individual and the restricted family with, by way of consequence, an extreme anarchy or disorder at the level of the collective, an anarchy whose victim will always be the individual, with the exception of those who occupy the key positions in such a system, namely the colonizer, who during the same period when the colonized reduce the universe will tend to extend it. Oedipus is something like euthanasia within ethnocide. The more social reproduction escapes the members of the group in nature and in extension, the more it falls back on them, or reduces them to a restricted and neuroticized familial reproduction whose agent is Oedipus. After all, how are we to understand those who claim to have discovered an Indian Oedipus or an African Oedipus? They are the first to admit that they re-encounter none of the mechanisms or attitudes that constitute our own Oedipus, our own presumed Oedipus. No matter, they say that the structure is there, although it has no existence whatever that is accessible to clinical practice, or that the point of departure is indeed Oedipal, although the development and the solutions are completely different from ours, Perrin Ortega. They say that there is no end to the existence of this Oedipus, when in fact it does not ever have, apart from colonization, the necessary condition to begin to exist. If it is true that thought can be evaluated in the terms of the degree of Oedipalization, then yes, whites think too much. The competence, the honesty, and the talent of these authors, psychoanalysts specializing in Africa, are beyond question, but the same applies to them as to certain psychotherapists here. It would seem that they don't know what they are doing. We have psychotherapists who sincerely believe they are engaged in progressive work when they apply new methods for triangulating the child. But watch out, a structural Oedipus, and this time it isn't imaginary. The same is true of psychoanalysis in Africa. Psychoanalysts in Africa apply the yoke of a structural or problematical Oedipus in service of their progressive intentions.